when it comes to Facebook, once again, we have them in the headlines, the spotlight, the fact that many investors are now slightly worried about the board and whether they've always been on the side of the shareholders or maybe sometimes on the side of Mark Zuckerberg. Talk to us a little bit about Mark Andreessen and whether these sorts of concerns are something that should be listened to.
Well, we've seen this week the release through a lawsuit of some extremely provocative text messages between Mark Andreessen and Mark Zuckerberg that happened while Mark Zuckerberg was talking to a subcommittee of the board that was attempting to represent the outside investors' interests in when he was attempting to change the structure of his own stock so he could retain control if and when he were able to give away all his stock to his philanthropy. And Andreessen clearly was coaching him to try to convince the others. The interesting part of it, among other things, was that there was some suggestion that Zuckerberg had tried to get some kind of exemption for his own political action if he were to go into government, which frankly I think is a little bit of a red herring, but it's highly intriguing that that would be the one exemption that he should have asked for. It comes as a huge surprise to me to think that he would even think of such a thing, because it's so evident, it seems, that he wants to stay at Facebook for the duration. But certainly Andreessen's getting a lot of criticism. He's being sued, and this is not a good thing for him.
How big could this story become, Brad?
Well, it's so complicated, right? And the story was co-written by my colleague Sarah Frier, and basically, Mark Zuckerberg is negotiating with a committee that is supposed to represent shareholders. Mark Andreessen, a well-known venture capitalist and a Facebook board member, is on that committee, and it turned out via these text messages that we now see because of the shareholder lawsuit that he had this back channel and was really helping Mark Zuckerberg complete these negotiations when he should have been representing shareholders. And I think it goes to a trend in Silicon Valley where these board members and venture capitalists are falling all over themselves to be founder friendly. They're getting a lot of deals, they're getting a lot of power because of that attitude, but we see that it can hurt shareholders. And I think in a case like a Theranos or a Hampton Creek or a Zenefits, some of these companies where the founders have kind of gotten a little bit out of control, it's hurt the community, it's hurt investors, and I think that's the real impact.
David, you wrote the book on Facebook. Does Mark Zuckerberg care?
Well, he cares about his image. There's no question about that. And I think he cares about Andreessen staying on the board. I actually don't think shareholders were hurt by this. I sadly disagree with my friend Brad. I don't really think that necessarily what Andreessen did was even so terrible. I think it's highly embarrassing. But in fact, the shareholders ought to thank their lucky stars that Zuckerberg is who he is. He's delivered them unbelievable value and almost certainly will continue to do so for an extended period.
And I wasn't saying that Facebook shareholders were hurt. I'm saying that this is the kind of behavior that kind of disenfranchises investors, and in the context of another company where you don't have a visionary founder like a Mark Zuckerberg, this is the kind of board activity that's really not representing the little guys, and it can hurt those investors.
Yeah, well, potentially, but I think the reality is many of these boards are comprised of people who were handpicked by these founders and whose job is to basically support them. And I'm not even sure that considering that and despite the fact that it's a public company, that looking at those texts, that I think it's inappropriate myself.